Welcome to Gardening the Radio Way with Uncle Bert. This is a reproduction of a radio show that was broadcasted by the United States Department of Agriculture in 1926. Disclaimer: this is a historic, archived production. Do not assume content reflects current scientific knowledge, policies, or practices. This broadcast was aired on the 3rd of March, 1926.
Dear boys and girls of the radio audience, this is Uncle Bert, the garden expert of the United States Department of Agriculture, broadcasting information about gardening, particularly for boys and girls, from Washington and about 30 other stations scattered over the country. This is the second broadcast of the series. If you have not yet requested membership in the Radio Order of Junior Gardeners, do so today, in order that you may receive all of our gardening material in printed form. Last week, we promised to answer questions this week pertaining to the early garden and how to start plants in the house for planting outdoors after the spring sunshine and the balmy breezes get the best of old Jack Frost. Half the fun of having a garden anyway is in beating the other fellow to it and getting vegetables from the garden just a few days earlier than he does. If we want early garden products, the way to get them is to start all the more tender plants in the house, or better still, in a hotbed. The first question that the boys and girls are going to ask me is, what kind of plants should be started in the house? There are only a few of the garden vegetables that can be started in the house to advantage. First of all is tomatoes. The tomato plant requires considerable time to come into bearing, and is very tender and easily injured by frost. For most localities throughout the northern and eastern states, the tomato seed should be sown about this time. I sow mine on Washington's birthday, or not later than March 1st. Peppers are also very tender and require a long time to come into bearing, and so it pays to start them right along with the tomatoes. Eggplant belongs in the same group and should be started early. The plants of the eggplant are a little difficult to grow, however, and it may be best to purchase a dozen or so plants from some plant grower, provided this can be done. In the main, tomatoes and peppers are the most important of the tender plants that should be started in the house. Cabbage, cauliflower, and lettuce can also be started in the house. These plants, however, will stand colder than tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant, and can be set in the open ground much earlier. Naturally, the next question is how to plant seeds indoors for the growing of early plants. That is easy enough. Go to the grocery or hardware store and get a wooden box about 12 or 14 inches wide and 26 or 28 inches long. Saw it into parts lengthwise, first cutting off about 3 or 3.5 inches of the bottom portion, making a sort of tray or flat box out of the lower part of the original box. If you are fortunate enough to get a whole box, that is, one with the top upon it, another cut can be made lengthwise of the box, which will give a second tray like the first one. If by any chance the original box is only 6 or 7 inches in depth, one sawing through the middle will give the 2 flat boxes. If you do not have a plane, use a jackknife and smooth the edges of the 2 trays and cut 2 or 3 small holes through the bottom for air and drainage. A common cigar box filled with soil will answer for sowing the seed of tomato or pepper, sufficient to produce 100 plants. Larger window boxes will be required later for transplanting purposes. The next step is to secure a little good soil for use in the boxes. Any good loamy garden soil will answer. But if you are near the woods, take a basket or bag, go into the woods, find a place where the leaves are deep, and by scraping them away, you will probably find a layer of black, loose soil on the surface of the ground underneath the leaves. This soil, leaf mold it's called, is excellent for the starting of early plants, but if it contains many small roots and pieces of the twigs of trees, it should be sifted to remove this trash before putting into the boxes. A good plan is to mix this woods earth about half and half with sifted garden soil, as the woods earth gives the garden soil more life, and the garden soil gives the woods earth a little more body or stability. In short, a mixture of good garden loam and woods earth make just about the ideal soil for a seed bed. Fill the box level full of soil and press down with a smooth piece of board. Then sow the seeds in little rows crosswise of the boxes and cover them about 1/4 of an inch deep by sifting a little more of the soil over them. How thickly should tomato and other seeds be planted in the seed box? Make the little furrows in which to plant the seeds about 3 inches apart, using the point of a lead pencil or a small sharpened stick, and scatter the seeds about 10 to an inch in the furrows. Be careful that 2 or 3 seeds do not stick together. There are about 1,000 or more tomato or pepper seeds in an ordinary packet as put up by the seed houses. Most gardeners, especially beginners, have a tendency to sow the seeds too thickly. Mark each kind of seed by writing the name on the edge or outside of the boxes and place them in or near a south window where they will get light and heat. Cover each box with a pane of glass, leaving a little opening at one end of the box for ventilation. The soil should be watered a very little each day. Just as soon as the plants are up high enough to touch the glass, it should be removed. From this time on, the plants must be watered carefully, or they are liable to die from a disease known as damping. When this disease attacks the plants, they simply fall over and die. But the disease can be prevented by careful watering and by giving the plants plenty of fresh air. Keeping the glass on too long will be certain to cause the plants to damp. I neglected to say that tomatoes, peppers, and eggplant being grown indoors should be put in one box, as they all require plenty of heat, while the cabbage, cauliflower, and lettuce should be planted in the other box, as they do better under colder conditions. What temperature should the tomatoes be kept? About 70 degrees, or 60 to 65 degrees at night, and 70 to 80 degrees in the daytime will be about right. Cabbage, cauliflower, and lettuce plant can go as low as 50 degrees at night without doing any particular harm, and should not be kept above 70 degrees at any time. Plants grown in a window bend their heads toward the light, and to prevent their growing very crooked, the box should be turned around every day to balance up the growth of the young plants. How long should the plants stay in these boxes? About 2 weeks, or until they are nice sturdy plants, big enough to transplant to other boxes. In the case of tomato plants, they should be taken out of the seed box and transplanted to boxes filled with rich garden soil by the time they have formed 2 little leaflets in addition to their seed leaves. The boys and girls of the Radio Garden Club will remember that most of our garden crops belong to the great group of plants that have 2 seed leaves, and that these seed leaves, which in reality are a part of the seed itself, come out of the ground first and before any real leaves are formed. What kind of soil should be used for transplanting early plants? Good, rich garden soil should be used. If the available soil is not rich, a little compost should be added, or just the tiniest sprinkling of chemical fertilizer, but the fertilizer should be well mixed with the soil. It is also desirable to sift the transplanting soil and take out any lumps or stones. How far apart should the plants be set in the transplanting boxes? About 3 inches and somewhat deeper than they were in the seed bed. Make the holes with the blunt end of a lead pencil or with a little round peg of wood, and be sure to firm the soil well about the roots of the plants. Water the plants just as they are transplanted and shade them from the sun for about a day after transplanting. How many tomato plants should be started for planting in the club garden? That depends on how many tomatoes you want for sale or home use. One tomato plant, if given a good chance, will produce 5 or 10 pounds of tomatoes, or about a bushel to every 6 or 8 plants. 100 plants should reasonably be expected to produce 10 or 12 bushels of tomatoes during the season. A window box 14 inches wide and 24 to 28 inches in length will hold about 50 or 60 transplanted tomato plants. 2 boxes of this size will easily provide for the growing of 100 early plants. It is a good plan to start 100 or more plants indoors, then follow with an equal number of later plants, which can be started in the cold frame or in an open bed in the garden. A question frequently asked by the boys and girls of the garden clubs is what varieties of tomatoes to plant for the early crop. Early Jewel is one of the earliest, with Bonnie Best as a close second. In sections where the tomato wilt disease is prevalent, one of the wilt-resistant strains, such as Marglobe, should be planted. For late tomatoes, the old variety known as Stone is excellent, or the variety known as Norton, where the wilt disease is present in the soil. Questions on the construction of hotbeds and cold frames were to have come up at this time, but these will have to go over until next week. In the meantime, every member of the Radio Garden Club should be starting early plants of tomatoes, peppers, cabbage, and lettuce in the house. Everyone should also secure a seed catalog and make a selection of seeds. Draw a plan of the proposed garden on a sheet of paper on a scale of 1 inch to represent a foot of garden space, and indicate the rows of crops by dotted lines. Next week, we will answer questions regarding hotbeds and cold frames, also garden plans, including what to plant in the garden and the arrangement of the crops. This is Uncle Bert's second talk from this station. As the spring approaches closer, I'm going to give the boys and girls, at least those who are interested in the fascinating sport of gardening by radio, hints that will help make the little garden seeds develop into plants like the pictures on the packet. Please tell your boy and girl friends who have radios about this gardening club and your new Uncle Bert. Ask them to write in for a membership card so that they may have copies of talks and other printed information on gardening available from the Department of Agriculture. Write this station, and your request will be forwarded to Uncle Bert in Washington. Until our next show, remember to giddy up and garden.
This production was researched and produced by BreakAway Empire LLC.